Hey guys, this is Kev again from Kripke the Chameleon and Friends, and today we're going to talk about how I set up, care for, and breed my mealworms and superworms. Thanks again for joining us guys, but before we get started, please be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. I took the mealworms and superworms out of the setup so I can show you how I set it up. So first I'm going to show you some of the superworms that I grew. These are their beetles. If I go over here, these are the beetles for the mealworms. We have some of the pupae, and we have some mealworms in here. And these are the mealworms that I keep refrigerated so I can control the population according to my needs. Now this is a quick illustration showing an example of mealworms and superworms. On the left side we have the mealworms. As you can see, we have the beetle. The beetle lay eggs. From there it goes to the larvae, which is known as the mealworms that you use for feeders. It goes back into the pupae stage and the cycle begins again. If you go over to the right, you will see where we have the adult beetle. It lay eggs. We have the larvae, also known as the superworm, goes back into the pupa, and the cycle begins once again. I obviously did this over 2 years ago, but I took the mealworms and superworms out so you can see exactly what I did to set it up in the event you want to do the same for yourself. This was originally set up for a mealworm, but I converted it into more of a superworm and partial mealworm. So let's go over first the tools that I used. So what I used was some tape. I used a glue gun, a screwdriver, and also one of these cutting tools like a box cutter. Right here we have one of those sterilite drawers. It's one of those multi-level drawers. I got a smaller one because I wanted to just work on a small project, but if you want to do something in a larger scale, you can always get one of the larger encasements. Right here you'll notice this is one of the drawers. I cut it out. I used the glue gun. So I used first the aluminum wire mesh inside. I cut it out of the container. And then I used a glue gun to create the seams to keep it contained. And you will notice here, you will see some scotch tape. That's the tape in the event the worms or the beetles want to climb out, they'll slip down. At this drawer, as I mentioned, I converted it from a mealworm to a superworm. This was originally for mealworms, so the beetles, whenever they lay eggs, you can shake the drawer out and the eggs will fall to the other level, and that's where it will hatch. So now that since I didn't need so many mealworms because they were going through the stages way too quickly. So I wanted to slow the project down a little bit, and I decided to make this a primary superworm. And for the mealworms, I decided to put a divider where I can keep the beetles, and the other side I can keep the worms. And I just had a little container where I'll put inside of there or somewhere else where I can keep the pupae. If I go here, you'll notice in my other video for the crickets, I spoke about getting these egg trays. Right here we have some Quaker oats. This is going to be for the substrate. And I also have here this little tray. I'll open it up a little later and I'll show you why I put holes in there. This is what we put our superworms in when you're trying to convert them from a beetle to a pupae. So now I'm going to take all the superworms as well as mealworms and I'm going to put them inside the enclosure. I'm not going to show you exactly how I'm going to do it because I can't hold the phone and put everything back together, but I'll go through a full explanation and why I put who where, and so you can understand the process. Also, you'll notice I had the screwdriver that I had on top. The reason I used the screwdriver is just simply heat it up on the stove, and I was able to make the little holes so we can create ventilation in each one of their enclosures. So I'll go into the process and explain a little further. So this is an example of the completed project. Hey sweetheart, you watching Dad? So if we go here to the bottom drawer, this is where I have the divider that's splitting it. Right here we have the Beetles for the mealworms, and over here we have the mealworms. If I go a little to the top, we have some pupae in here. Hopefully you can see it. It's not zooming in correctly. So you can choose to put it here in the bottom. As the worms develop into pupae, you can just simply put them over here, or you can keep them in something a lot larger somewhere else. If you go to the second drawer, right here we have the superworms. There's a whole bunch in here. They need as much room as possible because they're very, let's see over here. These guys are very cannibalistic, so you definitely want to give them a lot of room. If you go a little higher, we have the beetles. And these are superworm beetles. This was originally a mealworm setup, but I've noticed that it's working as well for superworms. Only because I'm keeping the mealworm project contained. I don't want too many mealworms. As you can see, I have a cup on top of here. These mealworms here, I refrigerate. They can stay in the refrigerator because they're converting over too quickly to pupae, to beetles, so I keep them in the refrigerator. As for superworms, you do not put those in the refrigerator. Only mealworms you can put in the refrigerator. But for the superworms, as you can notice what I'm doing with the project here, as the beetles are making babies, this is the enclosure that I had the mesh in the bottom. You simply open and close the drawer fast, and whatever eggs they lay will fall into the bottom basket with the superworms. From there, they can go ahead and feed and start growing up like normal superworms. So now I'm going to go in more to tell you how to convert superworms over to beetles. So this is an adjustable compartment container. If you're deciding to do a project with superworms because you want to convert them to pupae, because I mentioned before they're very cannibalistic and they don't like being around each other, they don't trust it for the fear of being eaten while trying to convert over from pupae to beetle. So you'll notice in this storage container I put holes so they can breathe. I also be sure to get your largest superworms if you're ever planning on doing this project, because it needs to be the largest ones in order for them to convert. You're going to put them in here with no food. So I'm showing an example of what it looks like when it changes to a beetle. Obviously it's coming from being a superworm, then it curls like a C, and then goes into a pupae stage, and then it goes over to a beetle. So this is an example of how you set it up. As you notice, I have them spaced out from each other. They don't like seeing each other at all. So you can probably even put a border to block them away, as well as separating them, and keep them in a dark area. And checking them every few days to see if they're converting over. So you don't add any food or anything. Just leave them separated in a dark area and check every few days and make sure they're converting over to a beetle. And from a beetle, you go ahead and put them back into the pen with the other beetles, and they'll go ahead and lay eggs and drop it into the basket of the superworms. So just in case you are wondering, should I invest in getting myself a compartment, you can also choose to use it for different things. I'll put some information in the description area, but as you can see, you can keep your jewelry, you can keep my watch. Let's see. You can also keep food for fish, different things. So it's definitely going to come in handy. So if you're not using for beetles, you can use it for your everyday use. So let's just go back with my closing statement. In closing, I'd like to thank you guys again for joining us here at Kripke the Chameleon and Friends and seeing how I set up my mealworm as well as superworm enclosure. This is going to be a cost-effective way from as far as raising your own insects for your pets, and you can ensure that they have the right nutrition, they're not going to be diseased, and you can be on top of things a lot more efficiently. So I'm going to put as much information into the description area as possible, and you guys can click in there if you want to do something like this for yourself. But until then, this is Kev again from Kripke the Chameleon and Friends, and as always, one love and God bless. Take care, guys.